It's an honor to be on a panel with a group of people who I have great admiration for, some of whom have been my mentors, others of whom have taught me many things about politics. And one of the things I wanted to remark on, and this was raised by one of the members of our organization, is that C-49 is not going to pass. And even if it did pass, many of the provisions in it, which Barb will cover, are either in completely fly in the face of our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, or they fly in the face of international law, and in particular, the Convention on Refugees, which is the landmark for why we have a refugee system. So the Tories have never really planned to pass this bill. What they did do, and it's a win-win for them, is either pass the bill and for a while be able to target people, or at least to make it look like they're being tough on criminals. And when we come into this debate, already with a loaded agenda, and we've been doing this on the left, against smuggling itself, then we just feed into that. And we feed into the classic debate that many of our racist governments have set up of good immigrant versus bad immigrant. It's really important because what they've been doing with this debate is they've sort of been really clouding the issues. And I mean, a lot of things are coming out that are just frankly not true, and a lot of what's not being looked at is what we're looking at tonight, of course, the deeper issues behind why smuggling happens, who gets smuggled, and who smugglers are. One of the big things that's being confused by the media, even by the left sometimes, but certainly by the Tories, is smuggling and trafficking. And this is one where I reveal one of my secrets, so if everybody from No One Is Legal could leave the room, please. My firm has been fortunate enough, or unfortunate enough, to actually take part in 2 Canada Border Services Agency investigations into traffickers. We've been particularly working with the Caregiver Action Centre around going after agencies that bring nannies over here, take their money, take their passports, hold them in a basement, 6 to a room, force them to go and clean restaurants, and that kind of thing. We also took part in an investigation of a gentleman who was holding Mexicans 6 to a room in a hotel, taking their welfare checks, having them work illegally on the side, and taking their paychecks. And during that, it's very clear, well, I learned, because as a consultant, of course, I never went to law school, so I sort of have to learn everything as I go. It's a little scary. What I learned is there is a distinct difference between trafficking and smuggling. Trafficking is most of what they're talking about in the media, where someone makes money off of someone, where there's an element of coercion, where someone is held against their will or their property taken. That's trafficking. When people start talking about sex workers being brought over, and many sex workers, of course, come of their own volition, and so I don't want to conflate that, but where people talk about sex workers who are brought in and basically abused within the system, that's trafficking. Now, I think most people would agree that the element of coercion is, of course, a terrible thing, and that trafficking is a terrible thing. But that is not human smuggling. And the other thing I just wanted to say, one of the most, I think, serious traffickers is actually the Canadian government. If we take a look at the Temporary Foreign Worker Program, it meets all the elements of trafficking. Someone is brought, they're kept in a job that they may not want to be in, their property is usually kept from them, either by their own consulate sometimes, or by their employer, or by the agency that hires them. They are put in a situation where if they speak out, they are threatened with deportation and detained or deported. That's pretty much trafficking. So if we want to go after the biggest trafficker of all, we should go after Citizenship and Immigration Canada and the Canada Border Services Agency, because those are the real scumbag traffickers. But more importantly, I think, we need to look at is who comes through smuggling. Now, the history of Canada immigration obviously is one of people coming usually for one of two reasons. Either they're fleeing danger, or they're trying to come to Canada to make money to build a better life for them and their families. And this was true of my great-grandparents and remains true to this day. The big difference, of course, and you can track Canadian immigration policy, is that when my great-grandparents came, they all looked like me. They're all white. They're pretty much all European. In the 40s through the 50s, 60s, 70s, that began to change. And more of the immigrants coming were people of color. Well, instead of welcoming poor and working class people, which Canada had done throughout its history to that point, when the tide started to turn to become a tide of people of color, we started imposing more and more regressive immigration regulations to make it harder and harder for working and poor people to come. And it's not a coincidence that when the courts forced them to take race out of the skilled worker, or out of the immigration program as an overt category, we put the skilled worker program into place, taking much of the same prejudices and hiding them under a point system that was basically designed to keep out non-Europeans. So, but people still want to come. These people may be like my employer, Juan Carenza, who came during the 70s to flee El Salvador, where he came with his family because they were FMLN supporters. They're supporters of the revolutionary movement, and their village was bombed, and they were attacked, and they had to get out of El Salvador. And they went to the States, where they weren't given any kind of status, and they eventually made their way to Canada, and basically would have been smuggled here. These are people, and here's my other admission of the evening. I think it's quite possible I may have participated in an incident of people smuggling at one point. I assisted in bringing an Iranian family once over to Canada to do a refugee claim from the United States. I brought them across the border. I lied to the bus company when we were getting on, and I brought them right up to the immigration office and assisted them in doing a refugee claim. And in some quarters, that's considered smuggling. In fact, there was a volunteer in Montreal that was arrested for basically doing the same thing and charged with smuggling. They dropped the charges, but basically that is smuggling. So we're kind of punishing people two ways here. First, we set up an immigration system where people can't come in the first place if they're poor and working class and of color. Then, if they make it here through whatever means, such as in the MV Sun Sea, where people were fleeing, a situation of civil war and pretty much genocide against Tamil people, and they do what anybody would do to save their family, and they organize a means to get here, and their only choice to do that is to do a means that's illegal because we won't let them come otherwise. And then when they get here, we penalize them. And under C-49, we would, and Barb will talk about this more, we would detain them for a year without a hearing. We would do all sorts of other things to make their lives basically a living hell. Even right now, the refugee system, if you make it here, makes people's lives a living hell. They spend 90 days where they can't basically, while they're filing their first paperwork, where they can't work. During that period, they're on welfare, but then we turn around and blame them for being on welfare when they can't even get a work permit. They spend sometimes up to a year or longer waiting for a hearing. In those hearings, some of the board members are decent, but some of them, basically re-subject people to the same persecution that they went through, that they were fleeing in the first place. I've seen clients attacked for their sexuality. I've seen women forced to tell over and over the stories of the sexual abuse they went through. And so we basically punish people all along. Well, C-49, and as I said earlier, C-49 is not going to pass. But it will come back again. This government is anti-immigrant. This government is especially anti-poor and working class immigrant. So it will come back again. And what it does is it just continues and escalates that double jeopardy. First, we make it impossible for people to come, then we punish them for coming here in the second place by using illegal means. And this government is just going to continue that. I just want to end with, because I only have 2 more minutes, 1 more minute, that I do think, though, it is possible to make gains under this government. And it's important that we're here tonight, and it's important that we're organized. The live-in caregivers, one of the most disenfranchised and oppressed groups of immigrants in the country, under an anti-immigrant Tory government, were able to get the rules changed to make the live-in caregiver program better, more fair, more just. So that they now only have to work 2 out of 4 years before they can apply for permanent residency. And though that seems a small thing, it used to be 2 out of 3, it's changed people's lives. The people in the shelter sanctuary status movement here in Toronto have managed to get one of the most hateful managers of the Greater Toronto Enforcement Centre to agree that immigration officers won't go to women's shelters or places that deal with violence against women. It is possible to win. It is possible to win. We can turn this debate on its head, but we can't fall into the terms of their debate. There is no bad, good immigrant divide. There is no such thing as evil smugglers who bring people in and poor victims who are just being victimized. There are some people who victimize people, but people make intelligent choices to come here for good reasons, many for the same reasons that us or our own families came. And those people should not be targeted. And until we're willing to open up our borders to allow poor and working people of color to come, we can't turn around and yell at smugglers for basically making that possible for people to flee poverty and violence. Anyways, I'm done.